Hello and welcome to The Popcorn Isn't Real, a podcast where we talk about all things fan theory regarding film. I'm Leif Eric and this is Torvald.
That's me.
And today we're going to be discussing Return to Oz.
So, you got Return to Oz on your mind. Why don't you want to discuss the original? Why do you want to skip straight to the sequel?
I mean, the reason why is because Return to Oz is just a really
better movie overall.
Right. It's a really good movie.
We're already losing listeners. I don't think most people would agree with that.
Well, it doesn't matter because we're catering to a specific audience. It's just us.
You got it.
No, so it's like I think it's one of the best films ever made. I'd put it in my top 10 of films of all time.
What's your top 10 films of all time? Shaolin Soccer, Almost Heroes, Top Secret.
Oh no, now we're losing all of our audience.
Hey, I mean, we're just telling it like it is.
I don't think any of those movies are in my top 10, but they're close.
Dude, every single one of those is in my top. I mean, Almost Heroes is my top one.
I mean, most people wouldn't even put it on the top list of Chris Farley films.
Well, I'm not most people.
Basically, what's great about Return to Oz, first of all, it was a complete failure. And while you're watching it, you understand why, because they created a psychological thriller / horror when they were supposed to be making a sequel to The Wizard of Oz, right? And I'm glad that they did that, that they ignored...
Who did that? Who wrote and who directed this movie?
So Walter Murch directed this movie. It was the start and basically end of his career as a director because it absolutely failed.
But he's so good.
Right. Well, I mean, what I was saying is that I'm really glad that he ignored all logic and made a psychological horror instead of a kid's film because it's a good film. But anyway, so as we're saying, it's a movie about trauma. So unlike the Judy Garland version where everything ends happy and she's like, oh, and you were there and you were there. This one shows just immediately from the get-go the aftermath of the hurricane. Dorothy, she can't sleep at night. She's up at 3 a.m. They're in the process of building their house. Aunt M, who I always want to call Aunt May, is worried because they have a mortgage. Uncle Henry's leg is broken, so he can barely move around. So from the very beginning, this is showing real problems, real trauma, not the fake happy that we had in the Judy Garland version.
Can I just say, I love how in this movie, they also do the you were there and you were there. But in this movie, the people being there is not good. They're not her friends in the real world or in her mind. Whereas in the first movie, everyone she met was someone she liked, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So obviously the whole theory, it was all in her head. That's not the fan theory I'm going with. Of course, it was all in her head. That's confirmed. That's confirmed by the original Judy Garland one. And it's definitely very much hammered down on in this one that it is all in her head.
It's all in her head.
My theory is that Dorothy's entire fantasy that she goes through during this film is all an effort by her subconscious to alleviate the guilt she feels in the part she played for the death of another patient who was at the doctor's office where she goes to.
Yeah, but I'm just where are you even getting this? Where is it from the scene where she shows up in her room and is petting the pumpkin? Where are you even getting that she ever interacted with that girl? I forget her name. Osma.
Well, in the real world. We don't know her real name, right? She's Osma in the land of Oz. Dorothy is taken by Aunt M to this facility, this hospital. I mean, it's just like a little house, a doctor's office, where Dr. Worley is going to use electricity to take all the memories out of her head and make it so she can sleep.
Electroshock therapy.
And so the first time Dorothy sees Osma is when she's looking at the reflection of the electroshock therapy machine, which is what becomes TikTok. And then she turns around and Osma is looking through a window. The next time Dorothy sees her, Dorothy is in her room and she's looking in a window, and then Ozma's reflection shows up again. She turns around and Ozma is standing
Ozma's there.
Right, Ozma's
With a
there.
pumpkin.
Right. And with a pumpkin, which she gives to Dorothy. There's kind of like almost an implication that like maybe Ozma, she's supposed to feel a little bit magical. Like, how did she get in the room? You know? But like the door isn't locked. A minute later, Dorothy goes to the door and looks like you can open the door and look outside. So it's very possible that this is just another patient there. This is another little girl who just came in. She was quiet.
Yeah, she likes to give people pumpkins.
She's not wearing any shoes, so she would be very sneaky, right? So anyway, she is the only person who like we don't necessarily know who her real world counterpart is, right? She's Ozma in the fantasy, but like my theory is that she was a real person in reality, right? Like that little girl who came in wasn't Ozma, it was someone, okay? Probably a little
Can I
girl.
just ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
So you said that you believe that just, you know, as the broad view of your theory, you said that you believe that Dorothy was involved in Ozma's death, right? And
yes.
So that's why. Okay. So you're saying that Ozma's death has traumatized Dorothy. That's why she's having some bad dreams and stuff. That's why she's
no
imagining this whole
we haven't gotten to Ozma's death yet. Ozma is still alive.
Okay. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead. You continue then.
Right, no, but that's a good clarifying question. At the beginning, Dorothy is just having issues because of head trauma because she was in a tornado, right? So that's the reason why she hallucinated this whole fantasy world of Oz and why she can't sleep at night, etc. What happens is that the evil lady and the wheeler, the orderlies who become wheelers, they take her and they're going to do the electroshock therapy on her, and then there is a power outage. And of course, Dorothy has been strapped down onto the gurney at this point. But then this little girl, who we're going to call Ozma, even though that's probably not her name, she frees Dorothy and she's like, we have to get out of here really quick. And so they run and there's people chasing them and they hide in these like lab coats for a sec. And then they get outside during a massive storm, right? And the whole time, this woman who later becomes Mombi, she is chasing them, right? We're seeing this from Dorothy's perspective. She seems like a villain. She
hunting them.
Seems evil, right?
Yeah.
But really, she's a person who is concerned because two little girls that she's in charge of taking care of are getting away into a big storm. And what happens? Well, they fall into an overflowing river. The woman, Mombi, she falls into the river as well, but she doesn't go down the stream, right? Like Dorothy and Ozma are both taken down the stream, and they hold on to a piece of something. We don't know what it is yet, but it just looks like a piece of wood. And then Ozma sinks, as does Dorothy. Then Dorothy comes back up and she has like the chicken coop thing has turned over so that Dorothy can get into it and floats away. We never see Ozma again, right?
No, Ozma died.
So Ozma drowned just then. Now Dorothy, who ends up losing consciousness and waking up in Oz, her mind is racked by guilt. Even though you could argue this isn't necessarily her fault, like Ozma was this other crazy patient who freed her and they ran away together. She's a little girl and she just saw another little girl die, so she's very traumatized at this point. So this entire fantasy story that she concocts throughout the film is all an effort of her subconscious to protect her from that guilt and blame someone else. And in the end, make her feel like she wasn't responsible and it's okay.
I see what you're saying, but I guess my rebuttal is mostly based on the fact that Dorothy found a key and was having dreams and was imagining all that stuff before she ever met Ozma, before any of this happened. So Ozma dying is not what made Dorothy crazy, if you're saying Dorothy's crazy.
Right,
Dorothy
no.
was crazy before.
Yeah, no, right. I'm not saying this is what made Dorothy crazy. Dorothy is already crazy. I'm saying that this story, like the story that happens throughout this film, is her subconscious brain's attempt to protect her from this crippling guilt of possibly having caused someone's death.
What I'm saying is it seems like she was on her way back to Oz anyway in her head, right?
Yes.
So she didn't really need a reason. She didn't really need a dead friend to get her there.
She kind of needed a reason. Like she's trying to get people to believe her about Oz, you know? Like she can't go back there herself. She doesn't know how, right?
No.
So it takes another trauma this time not a hurricane, but a different storm to cause the traumatic experience that makes her brain create a new situation.
From my point of view, it was unnecessary. I think her head was going to take her back to Oz as soon as she got to the hospital. She seemed like she already was thinking and dreaming and planning about like Oz, right? Like that's the whole she wouldn't have gone to the hospital if she was healthy. She wouldn't have gone to the hospital for electroshock therapy to, like the doctor said, get all those bad dreams out of your head. Right? Like, I mean, it seems like ignoring the first movie, if we think of Return to Oz on its own, it seems like she's a girl who's having constant fantasies, right? Like she's a girl who is always in her own world or always waking up screaming with nightmares, right? Like it's such a big problem that her family, which as you said, is dealing with whatever problems, right? Like they just had a hurricane, they have broken legs, all this stuff. They're paying to have her undergo expensive electroshock therapy. I'm just saying from the perspective of this movie, I don't think we needed a big traumatic event to make this girl crazy. I think she was already crazy. But with that in mind, it's not a stretch to say there's no evidence that she didn't imagine Osma, right? Like nothing in there implies that Osma was real.
Right,
nothing
but
implies that she wasn't in her head.
But nothing in the real world, as far as we know, is fake, right? Like there are no talking animals, right? The people from Oz aren't just wandering around in the real world. So like, I don't think that her brain is not necessarily mixing reality and fantasy. It's either in reality or she completely dissociates and goes into the fantasy, right? Like she's not like, in a constant flux between the two, mistaking them. Like she knows the difference between Oz and the real world. And also like the reason that Aunt Em gives for taking her to the doctor is not like, oh, she's always going to her own little fantasy world. It's that like, she's just not sleeping at night, right? And we see her at the very beginning. She's not thinking she's in Oz. She's just laying there wide awake. Like she's got issues, but I don't think she's imagining she's in Oz right there. And Aunt Em's whole reason for taking her to the doctor is because Dorothy is no use to her anymore. Like Dorothy can't work because she's tired because she doesn't sleep anymore. So they're mostly trying to fix that problem of the sleep issue.
Yeah.
Right? Like Dr. Worley in this movie is depicted not necessarily as a legit doctor, but more as like a snake oil salesman, So it seems like they didn't have a lot of options either. Like they may not have had the option of sleeping pills. When you see their town, it's really tiny, right? Like this is literally the only doctor in town. And yeah, he's got electroshock robots. That's how he doesn't have pills. Mm-hmm. One thing that I think supports this theory during the actual events of the fantasy, that it's sort of her brain trying to convince her she didn't kill someone and that someone else, namely Dr. Worley or the place where she was, is responsible. I think that there is evidence to support that in the film itself, in that everything Dorothy does in this film is bringing things to life. So she meets TikTok and she winds him up and brings him to life. Then she meets Jack and she has to tie him together and bring him to life. And then with the Gump, she literally has to go get powder of life and bring him to life, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the Gnome King is doing the exact opposite, right? He turned everyone into stone. So they were alive, he's making them dead. Mm-hmm. Then he's later turning everyone into ornaments. They were alive and he's making them dead, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's something interesting that I noticed while watching it is that every single time that the Gnome King turns one of her friends into an ornament, he becomes more real. So he starts off as stop motion. And then he becomes a guy, but like his beard is still like foam latex. It's not a real beard. Yeah. But then after the next person gets turned, he has like a real beard. And he says to Mombi that as soon as Dorothy gets turned into an ornament, there won't be anyone left who remembers Oz, and he'll become a real human being, is what he says.
Ooh.
So it's an odd thing that they have in there that never exactly pays off. What I think it's supposed to be representing is Dorothy's fear of Dr. Worley taking away her fantasy. And once he takes away her fantasy, then he's real, right? Like, then the reality is what's real once everyone forgets about Oz.
That's interesting. It doesn't directly support your theory.
No, it doesn't, but it is interesting. So I wanted to mention it.
No, you keep going. I'm just
but going along with the life and
here.
Yes, no, you're right. I just really like that bit.
Yeah,
but,
no, it's a cool point.
So going along with the life and death thing, like Dorothy wants to convince herself like she's bringing things to life. She didn't do it. She didn't kill anyone. And the ultimate symbol for life, I would say, is an egg. And what kills the Gnome King is this egg.
No, it's chickens. He doesn't. I mean, it just happened to be an egg, but he's specifically
right. But like
allergic to chickens. Chickens are poison.
But like I would say that this egg, like eggs represent life, the life that Dorothy took. And by swallowing the egg, he's taking the guilt that threatened to destroy her.
Swallowing your own eggs here.
Her brain is making him into the ultimate scapegoat.
Yeah.
So that she can move on with her life. Like it's his fault, not her. They were at his clinic. And, you know, that was his patient. She ran away. It's not Dorothy's fault.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I mean, if what you say is true, then it is his fault because...
Right, it is.
He's just letting minors run around unattended.
Right, exactly. No matter what, it's his fault. From the perspective of a young child, you might, you don't... Yeah. So she saves everyone. She goes back to Oz. She's going to be made the queen. But then Ozma shows up, right? Yeah. Ozma shows up in a mirror. And Dorothy helps her come out of the mirror. Dorothy has to reach in and pull her out. Now, here's an interesting symbol. When Dorothy reaches in and pulls her out, the mirror becomes water. Yeah. Which is what killed Ozma, right? And so the mirror becomes water. So this is Dorothy again trying to overcome that guilt. She's resurrecting Ozma in her mind,
or
right?
saving her, like pulling her.
Yeah,
out
she's
of the water.
saving, right? Yeah, she's making a reality where it's not her fault. Ozma didn't die, and like I didn't, maybe I didn't save her in the real life, but I'm saving her here. And then, interestingly enough, and this one I think is the biggest evidence of all, is that when Ozma is wishing Dorothy back to the real world and everything is starting to turn bright and Dorothy is saying, goodbye, everyone, goodbye. She looks over at Ozma and there's just a shot of Ozma staring at Dorothy, looking really sad. She's just got kind of this sad look on her face. And then superimposed over her face is water. Rippling reflecting water gets superimposed over her face.
But that's just the special effect that they use to imply a transition from Oz to the real world.
I would say no.
I would say yes.
But like, okay,
why not?
Here's the thing. Well, as an editor, when Dorothy wakes up, she is next to water. Yeah. So as an editor, it would make perfect.
Got knocked out in a storm in a river.
Yeah, she's on the side of a river. As an editor, it would make perfect sense to have Ozma's face, then superimpose water, have the water fade up, have Osma fade out, and then cut to a shot of water that you have just faded to, right? And then show that Dorothy is right next to that water. Okay, that would make sense, right? Like Dorothy's staring at water, so she saw water. But they don't do that. What they do is they superimpose water over her face, over Ozma's face, and then they fade all of that out. Ozma and the water go out. And then we fade to clouds. We fade to just this long shot through the clouds, like a helicopter shot just flying through the clouds. And then we go to mountains and we go to the countryside, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally we show Dorothy on the side of the river. We don't even really get any shots of water, right? So I'm saying that Dorothy is looking back at her and saying, this is the last, like that would have been her last memory was Ozma under the water drowning, and she's looking back, she's seeing Osma's sad face, she's seeing the water superimposed over her face. This whole effort was to convince herself that she didn't do it, but at the last minute she's kind of remembering the reason she was there to begin with, right? Because she's coming back to reality.
But that's not the last time she sees Osma.
Right, that's not the last time she sees Osma. So the next thing I was going to get into is, now this is going to get into like MK Ultra, brainwashing, conspiracy theory stuff, which we're obviously not going to get into, but like the idea that when you suffer a traumatic experience, you dissociate, which we know Dorothy does, and that in that dissociative state, you create another personality. Mm-hmm. And that personality is supposed to protect you from the trauma. So at the end, when Dorothy is about to go back, she wishes that she could be in both places at once. So we're back in Oz. Before that shot where the water shows up over Ozma's face, Dorothy wishes she could go back. She could be in both places at once because she's crafted this comfortable world here where she doesn't have to face the tragedy of real life. Fortunately for her, she can be in two places at once, or if her subconscious creates a split personality. Ozma represents that split personality, right? So like in order to bring Osma back to life, what she actually does is she creates a split personality of herself, and her other personality is Osma, or what she imagined Osma to be, like this beautiful queen who everyone loves, right? Even though it was a person that in real life she didn't even know. I feel like the resurrected Osma is Dorothy theory holds true because she pulls her out of the mirror, and also every other time she saw her was in a mirror, and Osma was trapped in mirrors, right? Like it is Dorothy.
I mean, I disagree there. Like I think that this supports a completely different theory, which would be my theory of what Osma is, which is that Osma was just another side of Dorothy's personality all along, right? Like I would say Osma was always in Dorothy's head, and she was trying to pull Dorothy back into Oz, right? Like she was trying to lead Dorothy to Oz. She was the part of Dorothy's personality that wanted her to escape. She wanted Dorothy to go into, you know, her safe world where she could be whatever she wanted to be, and she could meet, you know, fantastic creatures and people. Anyway, I mean, that's what I see it as, is that, Osma was her split personality the entire time. And then I see the ending as her leaving that part of herself behind, right? Like, she says, I wish I could be in both places, but I can't. I have to choose one. And this place is yours. That place is mine. I'm splitting from Oz, and I'm going to live in the real world.
But see, that's the interesting thing about the end, is that Osma grants Dorothy's wish to be in two places at once. She says Dorothy can use a mirror to look in on them whenever she wants. Yeah. And all she has to do is say the word and she can come back. Basically, Dorothy's subconscious has created this safe, dissociative space that she can use to escape any future trauma, right? Like the first time in the Judy Garland Oz, that was just, head trauma. That wasn't like her, who knows where that came from. But like now, her brain, her subconscious has created this dissociative space to protect her. And she has made a split personality where she can go back anytime she wants. She can dissociate, and then this split personality will take over and protect her from any real life hardship.
Okay.
And I feel like she in her subconscious knows that it's not real, because when she does summon Osma at the end in the mirror, at first she calls Aunt M over, but then Osma just shakes her head, and then she tells Aunt M that it was nothing. She doesn't want to destroy the fantasy she created to protect herself, because she knows it's a fantasy subconsciously. And so that's why she doesn't ultimately show Aunt M, even though at the beginning she did really want to prove to everyone that Oz was real.
I just don't see how this supports your theory of Ozma being a little girl who died. Like, this seems to only support the theory that Dorothy has split personalities.
Right. But my theory is that her split personality comes from the trauma of Ozma dying.
Yeah. Okay.
And so my argument against Ozma was always her split personality. Ozma always existed. But Dorothy didn't know who Ozma was, right?
No, Ozma.
Like if
Ozma
the Scarecrow had walked
out
in
from her wanting to get back to Oz, right? Like Ozma's the part of her who wants to go back, and that part didn't exist before because she'd never been there before, right?
Right. But like my argument against that is no other character who we see in the real world is a fake person.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm.
So like I just don't think there's any evidence to support that Ozma was a fake person in the real world. Like I think she has to have been a real person in the real world.
Okay.
And then the only explanation for what happened to her is that she died.
All right. Then what do you make of Belinda coming with her to Oz? Belinda the chicken is the only person who exists in both worlds besides Dorothy.
I am glad you asked, because that was part of my thing.
Let's get into
So I
it.
think that this actually supports the idea that her brain is creating situations to help protect her from trauma. Now, this is a very small trauma, but her brain still protects her from it anyway. At the end, Belina chooses to stay in Oz. Before going to the doctor's office, Dorothy tells Belina, she's talking to Belina, who seems to be a chicken that she really likes. She tells her that Aunt Em is planning on cooking Belina for dinner. As Dorothy seems to be very fond of Belina, I'm sure that Dorothy subconsciously suspects that Aunt Em may do this while she is gone at the doctor's office.
So she wants
so that
to
Dorothy won't
save
make a fuss
Belina.
about it, right? Yeah. And then so to protect herself from the sadness of coming home and finding her favorite chicken gone, I think her mind just makes a very simple thing where like Belina just shows up out of nowhere, right? Like it's not like Toto. Toto was with her in the first movie. Like Belina, she left at the farm, right?
Yeah.
So her mind creates Belina in this fantasy because she knows Belina's probably dead at this point, and then leaves her in the fantasy so that Belina can
Yeah,
always
so she can always
stay
exist.
alive.
She's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can get down with the Belina theory.
And that's where I think that supports,
theory.
like, but the Belina theory, I think, supports the Osma theory because the idea that she's creating another version of this person in her mind who is alive to protect herself from realizing that that person is actually dead.
Well, in that case, I think that the biggest omission, like the most glaring fault in your theory, is just the fact that nothing recognizes Ozma as existing outside of Oz except Dorothy. Like, if there was anything you could point to that would say that Ozma exists, right? Like any person mentioning her or talking to her or looking at her, but the only person who ever interacts with her is Dorothy, which leads me to believe that Ozma is Dorothy saving herself by pulling herself into her fantasy world.
Yeah.
Like, if you could point to anyone besides Dorothy interacting with Ozma outside of Oz, then it would be easy to buy this theory.
Right. Then that would definitely confirm her existence.
100%. Yes. Then
I think that her existence was specifically left ambiguous, but
okay.
I would say that at the doctor's office,
Yeah.
we know that there are other patients because Dorothy hears people screaming.
Yeah.
And when Dorothy asks the caretaker woman, Mombi, what that scream was, Mombi, I forget exactly what she says. She just doesn't answer her, or she doesn't want to talk about it or something like that. So I think that that does add at least some slight evidence that there could be other patients that they don't talk about.
Other patients.
So
and one of them could be
Ozma could be another patient,
Sure.
and even if she did exist, they wouldn't talk about her.
No, but then it strikes me as odd that there's no follow-up about the little girl who died at the hospital that night, right? Like, Dorothy just kind of goes home and everything's okay. And, you know, like there's no impact. I mean, I guess you could argue maybe the hospital covered it up or maybe didn't want to bring it up, but...
Right, but there is evidence that all people who exist in the real world do exist, right? Like Dorothy never imagined anyone else in the real world who didn't exist.
Well, but her being real and her being imagined are both equally likely because, I mean, Dorothy does imagine stuff.
Yeah, but also there is the question of if Dorothy imagined Ozma helping her escape and going to Oz with her, then why is Ozma not with her, when she first arrives in Oz? Like, I think that does help to support the Ozma was a real girl who died theory, because otherwise she could just keep imagining her once she gets back to Oz, right? Like, why didn't she get into the chicken coop with her, Yeah. Like, why did she just stop imagining Ozma at that point and then starts imagining her again later for no reason?
I don't disagree with that, but I would like to hear what you were going to say a minute ago.
So the doctor's office, it is feasible that if they had a little girl there, that they might try to cover it up and not mention it.
Or at least, of course, why would they mention it to Dorothy's family, right? Like, they don't need to know.
And we know that they would certainly not have any problem doing something underhanded like this, because at the end we see the Mombi caretaker lady being taken away by the police because that doctor's office was practicing bad medicine, right? They were doing bad things. She's getting arrested. So like, even though they don't say she's getting arrested because they covered up the death of this little girl, it is possible that they could have done that.
I'll grant you that. Like, that could be she's getting arrested because someone died under their care, right? Like, we don't know why she was arrested, but that's very plausible.
And also, Dr. Worley is said to have died because he went back, like, he didn't escape the storm. He went back in to go save his machines. If going back in to save machines gets Dr. Worley killed, they're not going to specifically single out this one little girl who died.
No, I mean, that's fair. That's fair. I also want to point out that there is a deleted scene where Dorothy gets to the hospital and where she first meets Dr. Worley, and he comes out and meets her and he says, "Well, hello there, Dottie." And then she has to correct him. She's like, "My name's Dorothy," or maybe it's actually her mom that corrects him. And he's like, "Oh, well, sure. Now, Dorothy, what can I do to make you happy?" And that's exactly what the Gnome King says to her when she arrives in the Gnome Kingdom. Anyway,
pretty cool.
Yeah, doesn't really prove much in regards to your theory, but it's possible maybe Dottie was the name of this other girl at the asylum. Or maybe he just, or maybe he just, read the name Dorothy and then forgot and tried to remember and said Dottie.
Right. It could feasibly be a nickname for Dorothy too.
Yeah. No, so I'm not going to read too much into that, but I thought maybe you'd bring that up as support that there's another little girl named Dottie who looks similar to Dorothy. Right.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Well, as it turns out, there are a lot of deleted scenes.
Oh, yeah?
And there's one. This one is the biggest confirmation of my theory. After rescuing Dorothy next to the river, Aunt Em is hugging her, and then the constable drives by and asks if they've seen any sign of the other one. Uncle Henry says no, but half the party is still looking further downriver, and Aunt Em says, God willing, they find her too, poor thing.
Oh, I mean, that pretty much confirms your entire theory without even trying.
Yeah.
Too bad deleted scenes aren't canon.
Yeah, it's true.
No, I mean, if we're gonna get into some conclusions, then I will say that of course I fully buy your theory. Like, why wouldn't I? It's a great theory. I mean, I love it. I wouldn't argue with that. It's great. It's perfect. I mean, clearly, I would even say I would take it a step further and say probably the best proof for your theory, which you didn't really harp on this, is that Dorothy, as far as I remember, she is strapped down. She could not free herself. Somebody had to have freed her.
Dude, no, you're right. I really should have brought that.
Yes, you should have. No, if Ozma is a figment of Dorothy's imagination trying to quote unquote drag her back to Oz, then how did she free herself? She couldn't have.
Yeah, no, you're right. That is the best evidence to support the existence of this person. But also worth noting, so in the cut of the film that was aired on Disney TV, which is the cut that we watched as kids, since we had ours taped from TV.
Yeah.
They actually had less scary stuff than the version you can now watch on Disney Plus. I think there are less shots of the heads, like Mombi's heads in the glass cases.
Wow.
Although there's still some, right? So it's still scary, but there's less. There are less shots of headless Mombi when she's looking around trying to find a head.
Hey, do you have any thoughts on Mombi's head switchingness? Does that factor into your theory at all? Because that seems to be a pretty big part of the movie that just doesn't really... doesn't really
I can make something up. No, clearly this has to do with what Dorothy's brain is doing, which is creating these split personalities to protect herself, right? From something she doesn't want to know, which Mombi switches heads. And Jack Pumpkinhead says that the only reason he's still alive is because Mombi hasn't worn the head that she was wearing when she put him in there, so she doesn't remember. So it totally deals in with the theme of creating different personalities so you don't remember something that you don't want to remember.
Yeah, that's true. But then why is it the evil person in her imagination world doing it.
Right. Well, this isn't like necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to make sense plot wise. It's just thematically related. Like they're surrounding everything. And speaking of things that are thematic, but I was talking about the Disney cut. Okay. So one telling cut though is they remove the part where Osma, the girl in the beginning, releases Dorothy from the restraints at the clinic in the Disney TV cut.
Oh.
So they'll be like, why would they remove that?
Yeah.
It's not scary. Unless, as we surmised, it proves that Osma is real and proves that she dies in the river.
There's really a little girl there who helped her. Wow, that's pretty good.
And then just some interesting notes. The chicken coop that she floats away in the river is actually at her farm at the beginning. Like it's just like against the side of the house. I don't think that really helps my theory.
I was gonna say that just makes it less reliable.
Now, another thing that does not help my theory. When Osma first shows up in Dorothy's room at the clinic, Osma knows Dorothy's name.
Uh-oh.
And I don't think she's ever been told it, although she was skulking outside the little window when Osma's talking.
Yeah, she could have heard Dorothy.
So she could have heard, like, we don't know how soundproof that little window was. So it is possible. But that part is meant to be, I think, a little creepy that she knows her name.
Yeah.
Okay, but here's another interesting note. In her room at the clinic, there is an illustration on her wall.
Yeah.
And it has a picture of two girls near a tree. One is brunette and one is blonde. So Dorothy and Osma.
Yeah.
And the caption on the illustration says, "I will give you rest."
Oh.
So like thematically, this is what Dorothy is doing after, for the rest of the movie after Osma dies. She's trying to give Osma rest in a way by resurrecting her and also give herself rest from the guilt she feels.
Yeah.
So just another thematic, little nod they put in there because, this is what they intended, of course.
No, it's a good theory. And I think, it's clear.
So I think it's officially confirmed and I'm pretty sure Walter Murch would be happy right now.
Dude, write him a letter. Ask him. I mean, do it. But no, I agree with you. I mean, of course, it's a great theory. You've won me over. I don't see how I could possibly dispute it any longer.
Give me, how many thumbs up do I get?
All of them. How many can I give you?
Two?
Two,
I guess.
No, 2 thumbs up. I mean, I think it just makes perfect sense, right? Like, I especially liked what you got into about Belina, because I hadn't thought that deeply about Belina. I had only thought superficially as far as like, hey, Belina is in Oz and she's the only real person who came to Oz. So that proves that real people other than Dorothy can be in Oz. But no, you're right. If she was dead, then of course she can be in Oz. So,
dude, one might say the chicken is all in her head.
You might say the chicken isn't real.
Right.
The chicken is the popcorn.
But what one character in that movie literally goes inside of another person's head?
Whoa, dude, it's Belina.
Dude, they put her in Jack's head. She's all in his head. Jack's head. Like, well, why else did they do that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that, I guess. But then what's Jack? Like,
well, I mean, he's Jack's also...
So right, it's like an Inception thing.
Right,
Jack's
he's in her head.
Dorothy's head, and Belina's in Jack's head. Whoa.
Yeah,
Yeah, all right. Well, this has been an episode of The Popcorn Isn't Real. Good theory there. I liked it a lot. I thought it was great.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. See you next time for more The Popcorn Isn't Real.
See ya. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. Opening music for this episode was provided by Christine. And if you like our podcast, don't forget to rate, review, subscribe on whatever platform you get your podcasts. And remember, the popcorn isn't real.